Those sounds you just heard, they're not what you think they are. You've just been exposed to the sounds of baby gators. Welcome to the AfterImage Podcast, and in this segment, we'll be exploring the American gator and Florida's odd obsession with showcasing these wonderful animals. So, why alligators? Why do a whole segment based on these creatures?
They're really scary. They're really big. And it's a part of nature that you don't get to see normally. It's pretty cool.
They're just cool. Just don't get close, that's all. That's the biggest thing. You know, you don't want to become dinner.
Why not? They're amazing critters, you know? They just have a look about them that goes, no, I don't want to be there. I don't want to get too close to you.
Yeah, they've existed so long.
There you go, guys. And it's so typical of the area. Very typical of Florida.
I think that when my heart pounds when I see the really big ones, there's a reason for it. They're dinosaurs. They really are. They're so cool though.
Back in the 1800s and even up to like the 1960s, there were no laws or rules or regulations about people buying live alligators. And so, yeah, people would come down from the north, people would buy live baby alligators and take them home with them as kind of a curiosity, right? And like, you know, here's a souvenir from my trip. So that definitely did happen until laws were put in place that outlawed it. And now it's illegal to own an alligator of any size in Florida without the proper permits.
That was Dr. Adam Rosenblatt. He's one of the premier experts on crocodilian species in which the American gator falls under. He has multiple awards and is affiliated with many environmental groups around the country. And, well, I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, so my job, if you want to break it down, I'm an assistant professor of biology at UNF. And
UNF is the University of North Florida up here in Jacksonville.
And then my research focuses on alligators and crocodiles and currently sea turtles. And I like to explore questions related to the effects of climate change and urbanization on those species and how they behave and how they interact with their environment and what that could eventually mean for people.
Great, thank you. That was a really good description. There was a Spinnaker article that came out this morning, actually, detailing what you did with surveying urban alligators. Do you think you could speak a little bit on that topic?
Yeah, so what we did is we, for the first time, we surveyed alligators in an urban area, which happened to be Jacksonville. And the motivation for this work was that urban areas are growing in size and density across the United States, but especially in the southeast U.S., which is where alligators live. And like the projections for the future are that within the next probably 40 to 50 years, that urban areas in the southeast are going to at least double in size. So what that means is that, you know, human beings are going to be more densely packed together. We're going to be occupying sort of a larger urban area. And that means that we're going to be having a bigger impact and more interactions with wildlife and with, you know, plant communities that we maybe didn't always come into contact with. And that includes alligators. I mean, alligators are the largest predators in the state of Florida, and there's a lot of them. The current estimate from Florida Fish and Wildlife is that there are about 1.3 million alligators in the state. And with, you know, the relatively stable size of the alligator population and with a growing human population in Florida, that means there's more chance for conflict, right, between humans and alligators. And there's also a greater chance that human activities could like affect alligators and push them further away from where they want to be, right? I mean, alligators before Europeans got here to Florida were everywhere. I mean, you could find them in basically every body of water.
I guess living here, have you ever seen an alligator in your backyard or crossing the streets?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Yes. They are all over. Yeah.
I've seen them on golf courses. A friend of mine had a pond with an alligator in it, a small pond, and he named the alligator Alice. And when he would call it, he would feed it, so it would come.
It's fascinating. We're losing, like, you don't get to do this anymore. You have to actually go find them. So you used to be able in Florida, you used to be able to just see them all over the place. We used to find them in our ponds, in our pools.
They were there before we were. You have to respect them.
True.
There's just been a massive population explosion, and we've had a big impact on alligators. Or at least that's the thought. And we really wanted to study this and see, well, can we actually measure what the impact of having a lot of people around and having a lot of urban development, what's the impact of that on alligator populations? So what we did is, me and my grad student, Eli Beal, we did a project where for basically all of 2019, we went out in the St. Johns River a couple of times per season. We would survey the St. Johns River to see where the alligators were and to see how big they are. So we would go out at night in a boat and we would shine a big spotlight around and we would see how many gators we could find, and we would count them, and then we would estimate their size, and we would sort of see where they are on the landscape. And so we did this work for a year, and what we found was that there are very, very few adult alligators in Jacksonville. We located 93 alligators, and only one of them was an adult.
Wow.
So that means that most of the population in Jacksonville is these smaller alligators that are, really small babies and also subadults. And we found that within different rivers and creeks that lead into the St. Johns, the alligators tend to avoid human-dominated areas. So in conclusion, what this suggests to us is that growing sizes of urban areas and the growing footprint of the human population in Florida is probably going to decrease the amount of available habitat for alligators and push them into more marginal areas that they might not otherwise want to be in.
Luckily, I don't have to go on a boat and shine a spotlight in the middle of the night. I can go to the St. Augustine Alligator Farm here in Florida to find out what Dr. Rosenblatt was talking about.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to St. Augustine Alligator Farm, and welcome to our realm of the alligator.
That was Ashley. She's a worker at the alligator farm, and I witnessed her standing in a pit of over 30 alligators without a care in the world. She gave a few fun facts about alligators in her presentation, and she says that alligators are
extremely intelligent. They have a true cerebral cortex, which is the part of the brain associated with higher learning.
So they're really smarter than you think. And she spoke to these animals as if they were common household pets like dogs or cats.
And can you open up? Open up, bud.
Anyways, I walked around the St. Augustine Alligator Farm for a bit. It's essentially a zoo for the variety of crocodilian species, reptiles, mammals, and exotic critters.
Our largest is actually 13.5 feet in length, but as impressive as that size is, that is nowhere the size of their ancient ancestors, Deinosuchus. Deinosuchus roamed around 80 million years ago, was 40 feet in length, and weighed 20,000 pounds. So kind of terrifying to think about. Lucky for us, they have shrunk down in size because there's no dinosaurs running around for them to eat anymore. All their prey item is a little bit smaller.
So alligator tourism is pretty well established. The park has demonstrations, easily accessible enclosures, and who can forget the gift shop? During my time there, I walked around the area and I saw dozens of alligators just lounging around a swampy enclosure. There was a wooden boardwalk running above the waterline with water just below my feet. And every few feet or so, just below me, there were bunches of gators just lounging around. If that boardwalk collapsed, I would have literally been swimming with the gators. There were multiple dispensers around the habitat that held not candy, but alligator feed for 25 cents only. There's a highway running right next to the park, and passing by, you'd probably never even know this area houses hundreds of animals. Is this tourist spot really good for the livelihood of gators?
As a species, right? As a total entire species, alligators are doing quite well. They were almost hunted to extinction back in the first half of the 20th century, and they were put on the endangered species list back in like 1969 or something. They're like actually one of the greatest conservation success stories in like the entire United States. So I think a place like St. Augustine Alligator Farm, which is drawing attention to them and saying these are amazing animals and we should respect them. And here you can see an example of almost every single species, and you can see all the different varieties of all the different variations between these species. I mean, I think that's a really valuable public service.
I also spoke with Dr. Rosenblatt on the misconceptions of alligators and what educational farms like the St. Augustine Alligator Farm are doing to teach the general population.
Well, so that was one of the things I learned once I started doing the research and just learning more about alligators, is that their reputation is not deserved. It's like since 1948, the numbers are so incredibly small. The number of people who have been bitten by alligators in Florida is like 450, right? So, you think about 450 people, that obviously sounds like a big number, but when you space it out over 70 years, you're talking about maybe like 6 or 7 people per year who are bitten by an alligator. But when you think about how many, there's like 20 million people who live in Florida, and there's like more than 1 million alligators. And so the fact that there's that many alligators and that many people living in relatively close proximity to each other, and there's only, 5 or 6 or 7 bites per year, I mean, it's so rare. I can't even tell you. It's like nothing to be afraid of. And then if you think about deaths, the number of people who are killed by an alligator in Florida every year is less than 1. There's less than 1 person per year who is killed by an alligator in Florida. And so more people per year in the United States are killed by dogs. I mean, dogs kill like 30 people per year in the United States, and alligators only kill like 1 person per year in the United States at most. And so the relative risk is incredibly low from these very large and seemingly dangerous predators. And so, yeah, that was one of the first things I learned, is that their reputation as kind of ruthless killers and, hunters of people is not deserved at all.
Are there any other misconceptions that you think should be cleared up or can educate people?
Another misconception is that alligators are sort of primitive animals that are not that intelligent and, again, not really seen as worthy of respect. My experience with alligators is that they're actually quite intelligent. They can remember things. They can definitely remember people. They can, they have sort of hunting strategies that they've developed over time where they can become very efficient at hunting certain kinds of prey that might be difficult to capture or to eat. They, can learn to avoid people if people have been harassing them. So they have the ability to learn. So they're much more intelligent than people give them credit for. And, the idea that we should look down on them because they are, a quote unquote primitive species is very misguided in my view.
So now that we've learned so much about gators, what can we do to help?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's a couple different things. The first thing is that nobody should be doing is ever feeding alligators, because it's not wild alligators, because that's what leads to part of this problem. People need to learn how to interact with alligators, because one of the reasons that alligators get hunted and that they get removed by nuisance trappers is because people view them as a nuisance. And alligators really only become a nuisance most of the time because people have not treated them with the, amount of respect that they deserve. So like what happens is that people will feed alligators, wild alligators, right? They'll just throw them fish or throw them, various scraps of food when they're camping or when they're, fishing or when they're doing whatever. And when people do that, it causes alligators to associate people with food, right? And that means that they are more likely in the future to try to approach people and basically beg for food because they now associate people as a food source. Another thing is that people should not be harassing alligators when they shouldn't be harassing alligators ever. It's actually illegal to harass an alligator in the state of Florida, but they shouldn't be trying to mess up their nests. The females will build these big nests full of eggs in various areas. And number one, it's illegal, but number two, it's just a bad idea to interact with an alligator nest because the females, the mama gators, they will defend their nests very aggressively. And so that's another reason that, people could view them as a nuisance when in fact they're just protecting their eggs, right? So those two kinds of behaviors are things that people can do to not cause alligators to be seen as a nuisance. And then what our research suggests is that people should be limiting the amount of development that they're doing in areas along riverfront or along lakefront or along coastal areas, because that's what our research shows, is that if you really hyper develop these landscapes, it forces alligators to move away. And if you want alligators to be a part of the landscape, which I am one of those people who does want that, I want to share the landscape with wildlife. I don't want, I don't want urban areas to just be human beings and for all wildlife to be somewhere else. That's not a healthy relationship, and it's not a way to sort of promote healthy ecosystems and healthy communities. So it's to think about the impacts of building businesses and homes in certain areas and whether that's actually the right thing we should be doing or not.
For better or worse, we humans are influencing our surroundings. The best we can do is educate ourselves on the creatures around us to better both worlds. So the next time you visit Florida, watch your feet around the sewers and remember not to feed the gators. I'd like to give special thanks to Dr. Adam Rosenblatt from the University of North Florida for agreeing to be interviewed for this podcast. I'd also like to thank the St. Augustine Alligator Farm for allowing my recordings, and thank you, Dr. Jillian Smith, for your help and guidance.